Anyway, after that meeting, they said to have his elections, and then, of course, some people won, some people lost. Zik eventually took advantage of another event in 1941 to leave. What happened in 1941? Let's say this very, very quickly. You see, there was a man who was leading the group at the time, NYM. The person's name was Sir Kofa Bayomi. Kofa Bayomi was the president of the movement. And then in 1938, he decided to run for a seat in the Legislative Council. And he won. But a few years later, he decided to travel to the UK to study some specialist course in ophthalmology. Now, upon his departure, the place was declared vacant. Now there's going to be a by-election. Now, according to the policy of NYM, if the president of the movement indicates interest in a particular seat, he should go unopposed. No other person should take that seat. In other words, if he has to vie for it, it will be between NYM and another party. Nobody will do anything within NYM anymore because the president says he's interested. In other words, regardless of the results of that in-house election, we're still going to have to wait for the Central Executive Committee, the Oga at the top, to decide. Anyway, the Oga at the top decided, and what they said was that, listen, we have a policy, regardless of what you have done, is going to be NSC Kuli. So when they said this, by the way, Obasanjo Akisanya was the vice president of NYM at the time. So he agreed, he said, oh, it's fine. He shook his hand, said, we're going to support you and everything. But they discovered that he still was in the race, perhaps as an independent candidate, but he was still interested. And then the craziest thing in Nigerian politics up until that time happened. And for me, I think this was actually when Zik showed his hand. Two things. Number one, Zik said something about the election. He also used the opportunity to talk about the fact that he was no longer a member of NYM, the same group that was going to expel him 4 months prior, but decided not to do so because they also were looking at how to play politics. Anyway, let me read something to you about what Zik did. Again, remember this. NSC Kuli, the president of NYM, was an Ijaw man. Obasanjo Akisanya, the vice president, was an Ijebu man, Ijeburemo. Both of them wanted to run. The person who supported NSC Kuli, one of the most powerful voices at the time for NSC Kuli, was another Ijebu man. His name is Obafemi Awolowo. So why am I putting all these things out? Because of what I'm about to read. So take a listen to this. What was heartrending to many of us was the element of tribalism which was introduced into the campaign with a view to swaying the minds of the people in sympathy for Oba Akisanya and embittering them against the movement. The candidature of Oba Akisanya had been rejected because he was an Ijebu, declared the pilot. When was this? 21st February 1941. 1941. Zik published that the reason they didn't want Akisanya to become president, to run for that seat, was because he was Ijebu. Meanwhile, the man who was actually supporting the Ijaw man was also Ijebu. I knew it was not true that Obasanjo Akisanya had been rejected because he was Ijebu. The view that eventually prevailed at the meeting of the Central Executive Committee was that since Ikoli was the president of the movement, and that he had expressed a wish to contest the only seat at the by-election, it was improper that any other officer or member of the movement should come into the running at all. If Ikoli was good enough to be number one man in the movement, he was also good enough to represent the organization in the Legislative Council. I strove hard to persuade the Ijebus that they were being deceived, but in vain. I stood firmly by Mr. Ikoli to the end, and he won. I am striving hard to persuade some Yoruba people that they are being deceived. I hope it doesn't end in vain. Guys, for the first time today, I'm going to have to use ethnicity because I have to make something very clear. Because again, it still happens today. Not because of hatred for anybody, but because we have to shine our eyes. October 1940, they were going to have a by-election. Please stay with me. They're going to have a by-election in Lagos to fill the vacant seat that was left open since after Mr. Olakija died. Jubri Martin wanted to run. So there are a number of people that wanted to run. Jubri Martin wanted to run, and Ezekuli wanted to run, Obasanjo wanted to run, and then a couple of other people. I think Maja also wanted to run. But guess what? Zeke also wanted to run. And he actually ran within the house, but he got the least votes. So he was not selected. 4 months later, stay with me, 4 months later, Zeke had an epiphany. And in that epiphany, what he said was that, hey, Tati Eba Damilogun Mafoleyini, one Damilogun ní October, àti wà February nsìn, báwo fẹ́ dá àárín wọn rú? Nǹkan tí máa sọ fún wọn ni pé àwọn ẹni yìí ó máa kó ẹ̀yìn wọn sí ara wọn ni. Yorùbá ló pọ̀ jù nínú NYM. Ẹ máa gbọ́ mi o. Yorùbá ló pọ̀ jù nínú NYM, and like Papa said in this book, it was like it was a coincidence, because of course NYM started in Lagos, so naturally more people there will be Yoruba. So how do you destroy this group? Say to the general populace that what is happening right now is happening because this man is Ijebu, and it's something you should look out for. How did it happen in the last election? So you see, in the 1940s, we're still trying to, 1930s into the early 40s, we're still trying to get out of the suspicions and hate going in some cases, or dislike, if you like, for each other amongst Yoruba people, because that was just a few years, or just some years after the Kiriji War. So we still had distrust and suspicion of each other. So what Azikiwe could use was to whip up tribal sentiments within the ethnic group called Yoruba and say, listen, àwọn eléyìí, àwọn Èkó yìí, àwọn Ọ̀yọ́ yìí, àwọn Ìbàdàn yìí, àwọn gbogbo àwọn people yìí, wọn ò fẹ́ kéléyìí di nǹkan kan tó pọ̀ ń jẹ́jẹ́bù. If you understand, for instance, what happened in 1892, it's called the Imagbon War, where Ibadan and Ijebu got in some serious fights because Ibadan was on the side of the British, the English. It's called the Anglo-Ijebu War. And what you noticed was that they had fought and that was over. So if you understood Yoruba history, you could whip up that sentiment and say, oh, they're against Ijebu people. So something similar that happened in this last election, nobody could use Ijebu versus Ibadan this time. Why? Because at the hill, right? One of the major reasons, we're going to get to it maybe today or next week. One of the major reasons for the Egbe Mojujua was to fill that gap, so that we're not looking at ourselves as individuals or different groups because of the Kiriji War. And thankfully that's been achieved. So what they did in the last election was to say, Christians and Muslims, Yoruba, for the first time in Nigerian politics, I heard the phrase Yoruba Christians versus Yoruba Muslims. So they look at you guys. You can't have Ijebu versus Yoruba. If, by the way, I'll tell you how they did it in Lagos and what they did in among Yoruba people entirely. So let me start with the one they did for Yoruba people. Among Yoruba people, they started with, oh, you are Christian, you're Yoruba Muslim. Then they started fighting themselves. I want to understand, you are both Yoruba. There's nothing to create a division amongst you as a whole. But how do we make sure that you don't vote for Tinubu? We are going to say that it's a Muslim ticket and it threatens the Yoruba Christians. And a lot of Yoruba people fell for it. When you hear church take back your country, it is not a spiritual talk, it is not a religious talk, it's a political talk. The man cares nothing about the church. He cares about his ambition. And if good or bad, that's not my business. The point is just that I know exactly what it's about. He doesn't really care about how many times has he visited Experience or Paul NHS Church since that time. It was just for a goal. It was a means to an end. There's nothing spiritual about his statement. It was about politics. Hello, Daddy. It's a religious war. You are a Christian. You think that person cares about your faith? As soon as they lost, what did he tell you? Say all your VGs, they will turn into a factory. People talk and then you think that they really care about you. And let me zero in on Lagos. What happened in Lagos was this. There was a movement that started a few years back, which interestingly was a repetition of what happened in the 1940s and 50s with the 1950s with the Godogbo thing. And GRV, and somebody's right, you're right, GRV used that. And then Igbos joined him. What did they say? They said the indigenous people of the land don't want Yoruba people involved in what they are doing. They were trying to extricate the Awori people. And I've said it several times. When you hear a person running for office saying that my father has been here since 18 something, my father has been here since Kinikon century, number one, I already know that you are not from that place. You know why? Ọmọ Yorùbá ló máa lanu sọ fún pé ìgbà báyìí ni bàbá mi délẹ̀. Wọ́n sọ ẹni tí ò bá ń ṣe Yorùbá àbí tí wọn kọ́ lẹ́kọ̀ọ́ ọmọlúwàbí ló máa sọ nǹkan bẹ́ẹ̀. Bàbá yìí náà bí mi, bàbá yìí ni bàbá mi débẹ̀. Ta ló béèrè ìtàn ìdílé yín? Then he says the indigenous people want something, and by the way, I don't know how this happens, but again, history, I don't like saying history repeats itself. People repeat history, to be honest, but for the sake of this thing, history repeated itself. In the 1940s, we're going to read it very soon. In the 1940s, in 1941 specifically, it was the Igbo and the Ijebu, because the Igbo man convinced the Ijebu man that everybody in NYM hated him because he was Ijebu. Therefore, the Ijebu people pulled out and they said, since it was an Igbo person who told us about it, that means that we're doing something together. It was Ijebu and Igbo that pulled out at the same time. Don't buy that nonsense narrative. Oh, people are against Awori. Awori and Igbo will now fight against the rest of the Yoruba people. You will still lose. You know why? Because it's not all the Awori that will follow the Igbos. Some Awori will still stay back with their kith and kin. And so the people who usually get bamboozled by this thing will still be in the minority. But my question is this: why would an ethnic group do the same thing again and again for more than 80 years in a particular place? Why? And it wasn't just Lagos. It wasn't just Lagos. It also happened in Ibadan in the 1950s. Why? If it's happening today, again, nobody's saying anything so I can go and hate anybody. Just don't get carried away by where Yoruba people used to be very, very accommodating. They just switched. To be fair, whatever you're saying right now, it's not you that. Let me put it this way. Owanle. It's just that it's what you need right now. We didn't have to import it. So whatever it's like a coin. Olojumeji, there's head and tail. What you saw was the head. What you are seeing is the tail. And that tail you are seeing, you're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. Okpo, reke, reke. Let's continue. So Papa said, I strove hard to persuade the Ijebus that they were being deceived, but in vain. I stood firmly by Mr. Ikoli to the end, and he won. On polling day, March 5, I was extremely depressed and agonized by the unabashed demonstrations of tribalism which I witnessed. All the Easterners, particularly the Igbos, and all the Ijebus in Lagos teamed up with Dr. Azikiwe and Oba Samuel Akisanya. And all those who dared to disagree with them were openly abused. Ah, God. I'll take it again. I was going to say something about me first, so later. On polling day, March 5, I was extremely depressed and agonized by the unabashed demonstrations of tribalism, which I witnessed. All the Easterners, particularly the Igbos and all the Ijebus in Lagos, teamed up with Dr. Azikiwe and Oba Samuel Akisanya, and all those who dared to disagree with them were openly abused, jeered at, and condemned as traitors. Afonja. Tell me if this is not what you are seeing on Twitter. Anybody who spoke against it, they insulted them, they jeered at them, they say, oh, you're not for nationalism, you are the tribalists. When was this? 2023? 1960? No. This is 1941. It is the same template. The old dog has no new tricks. He's not that smart. For the first time in my life, I was called a traitor and Uncle Tom, all because on principles which appeared to me sound and just, I supported an Easterner against my own tribesman. But of course, Ikoli is an Easterner with a difference. He has never stooped to worship at the shrine of Dr. Azikiwe. Who is your Dr. Azikiwe today? The man who can never be wrong. The man who you dare not speak against his politics, even if it's as tribalistic as they come. Who is Dr. Azikiwe today? Anybody in the comment section? Let me engage us for 1 second, for 1 minute. Who is the Azikiwe? Exactly. And just like there were Yoruba people that supported the Igbos and Zik to speak against their own people, is exactly how you have Yoruba people now in obedient movement speaking against their own people. Again, it's the same thing. Thank you. I see the answers. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Oloye. Thank you, TY. Thank you, Ibo Jinojo. And sneak peek. I don't know the bit Tasha. But you get the point. The point is, whatever you are seeing right now, Oti Sheleri. Ohun tó ṣẹlẹ̀ sí mi rí ni. Ayé tótó, ayé màlè. Oh, mo ti mí sọ̀rọ̀ méjì pọ̀. There's one by Ebenezer Obey. Then there's Shino Peters.